Shabbat Shalom. I don't know about all of you, but when I see certain of God's creations, I am especially moved. I love bees, and I love butterflies. Who doesn't love a butterfly? When I see a butterfly, I cannot help but pause and reflect on the miracle of transformation and rebirth that we get to observe in the life cycle of the butterfly. And the effect it has on me is really nothing short of an inspirational, revelatory experience. We don't get to see them enough. They are rare and becoming rarer. And so that effect that these butterflies have and should have on each of us is to marvel at the fragility and the resilience and the magic of creation. But in modern scientific discussion, the butterfly effect is not referring to the delight and overwhelm that I, or maybe some of you, see when we behold a butterfly. The butterfly effect is the idea that small, seemingly trivial events may ultimately result in something with much larger consequences. In sort of slightly fancy words, small, trivial events have non-linear impacts on very complex systems. For instance, when a butterfly flaps its wings in India, that tiny change in air pressure could eventually cause a tornado in Iowa. In a week of pretty extreme weather events, I was further drawn to this notion. That's in its extreme, and that's the most common example given of the butterfly effect. The term itself was coined in the 1960s by Edward Lorenz, a meteorology professor at MIT, who was studying weather patterns. He devised a model demonstrating that if you compare two starting points indicating current weather that are near each other, they'll soon drift apart. Later, one area could wind up with severe storms, the other stays completely calm and mild. At the time, weather statisticians thought that you should be able to predict future weather based on looking at historical records to see what had happened when conditions were the same as they are now. But Edward Lorenz was skeptical. He was running a computer program to test various weather simulations, and he discovered that rounding off one variable, this is the number always given, from 0.506127 to 0.506, dramatically changed the 2 months of weather prediction in his simulation. How people do these kinds of things is amazing to me, but that's another discussion. His point was actually that long-range weather forecasting was virtually impossible at the time, in large part because humans didn't have the ability to measure nature's incredible complexity. There were simply too many minute variables that could act as pivot points, cascading into much bigger consequences. So people tend to think that the butterfly effect means that tiny changes can have big consequences. That's true, but that we can track this progression to see what change caused what. Lorenz was actually teaching that we can't track these changes. We actually really don't know what causes weather patterns to go one way over another. Now, to this day, with the weather systems that we have today, I mean, it's extraordinary how precise our weather predictors are. But at the time, this notion of this butterfly effect caught on to suggest the overwhelmingly intricate web of interdependence that permeates all of creation. We tend, I think, and understandably, to think of ourselves as essentially finite creatures. We know that we have an effect on one another, but the tendency for human beings is to feel a sort of radical self-determination, certainly in this country. We emphasize the rights of the individual, the sort of rugged cowboy out on the plains, answering to no one, responsible for little but himself. But this week's Torah portion, as many of them do, but especially TeTzei, has this wide, varied, and complex assortment of laws and instructions for the Jewish people. If you read the whole parsha, you see it covers rules for ethical warfare, family life, prompt burial of the deceased, property laws, humane treatment of animals, I'll come back to that, fair labor practices, and proper economic transactions. It's full of reminders of how intricate is our web of dependence and interdependence on one another and on the natural world. The parsha begins with an admonition to a soldier who may take from among the captives, these words are very strong for us right now, a beautiful woman, and he is attracted to her. He could take her as his wife, bring her into his home, shave her head, trim her nails, and after she lives in the house and mourns her father and mother for a month, then you can go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you are not pleased with her, she may go where she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. But what follows after this law of the, quote, hated wife, whose children must be treated fairly, and also the rebellious son, who could be put to death, but the rabbis say, please don't worry, this never actually happened. Rashi sees in these succession of laws a series of cause and effect, that one action, of course, as we know, but need reminding, leads to another. Rashi links these strange laws to suggest that we must learn the consequences of acting on our urges. Yes, you can marry a woman captured in war, but look where it gets us. If we follow the progression of mitzvot, unfortunately, sometimes those marriages ended in terrible rupture, and we would end up potentially with family difficulties across the generations. The Torah teaches us that to see in another human being only a way to gratify personal desires, even in a more restrained, permitted way, can end up leading to a rebellious child, difficulty and rupture across generations, and a cascading series of events that are painful and damaging to society and to the community. The desire to link these mitzvot together in this parsha extends across commentators. In another section of our parsha, we read, when you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it. A flat roof is an inherently dangerous place. We are supposed to anticipate the danger and build a railing so no one falls. It's not an especially radical leap, teaches a wonderful teacher, Aaron Dorfman, to apply the principle more generally. If we can foresee that something we own may cause danger, we should take precautionary action to mitigate the danger. In the spirit of this verse, American law has regulated some of the most mundane details of home ownership. You have to clear your sidewalks of ice and snow. I know you all do that regularly. So postal workers won't slip and fall. Swimming pool owners need to cover their pools when they're not in use to prevent anyone from falling in and drowning, etc. Maimonides in the Middle Ages expanded the principle dramatically, though. In his legal commentary on this verse about unintended consequences and trying to prevent accidents, he wrote, both the roof and any other object of potential danger, by which it is likely that a person could be fatally injured, require that the owner take action. Just as the Torah commands us to make a fence on the roof, so too regarding any obstacle which could cause mortal danger, all human beings, not just the owners, have a positive commandment to remove it. If you do not remove it, but you leave the obstacles constituting potential danger, one transgresses a positive commandment and negates a negative commandment. Thou shalt not spill blood. We've got a lot of responsibilities in our society, in our homes, with our families, for ourselves, for one another, in our communities. If all people, according to Maimonides, and he set extremely high bars, thank you, Rambam, but if all people are responsible for anticipating all unintended consequences of our actions and of the state of the world, where would it end? If we took that principle to its logical extreme, we will be paralyzed, not only by compassion fatigue, but simply by the overwhelm of the task at hand. It can't be that the Torah and Maimonides would set us up for such an exercise in frustration. A well-known Talmudic passage, though, does say, whoever can prevent his household from committing a sin but doesn't is responsible for the sin of his household. If he can prevent his fellow citizens from committing a sin but he doesn't, he's responsible for the sins of his fellow citizens. If he can prevent the entire world from committing a sin but doesn't, he is responsible for the sins of the whole world. So I think we need to be very careful who steps up to the plate to take on the responsibility for the entire world. The key word here is can. If one can intervene in your household, you need to do it. If you can, and you're blessed with the ability to intervene globally, then someone with that amount of money and influence and power needs to step up to the plate and do the good that the world needs. We can look at the world, at all the roofs left unguarded, the dangers that imperil people, and the implications are daunting. We're here in this season of personal reflection before the high holidays. How much responsibility does each of us bear for our actions and their consequences? Deuteronomy over and over and over again, and this Parashat especially focuses, and there's so many wonderful details, just touching here on a couple, reminds us how crucial our choices are, because each one of them, like the flapping of a butterfly's wing, can set off a chain reaction that can lead to tornadoes, or maybe maintain calm. But how, you may be asking yourself, you may raise your hand and say, Rabbi Shana, how on earth are we to look ahead and know what our actions will cause? I like to say sometimes, I've misplaced my crystal ball, and I am unable to look into it and see what the future holds. None of us can predict what will happen in the next 5 minutes, let alone the next 5 hours, days, months, or years. We are here only in this moment, doing our best to make the choices we can make, and hoping against hope, right, Cantor Rudy? For the okay. Because hoping for the best in these last few years of COVID and everything else that our world has experienced may be setting the bar a little too high. I don't know about you, but most days I'll take the okay. But the tradition doesn't let us rest with just the okay. It looks into this parsha as well and sees in it the possibility of our choices having the consequence of one day bringing the Messianic era. And there they point to another so well-known verse in this parsha, that when you come upon a mother bird sitting on her eggs or upon young birds, you shall not take the mother bird together with her children. You shall send away the mother, and only then may you take the young for yourself, that it ought to go well for you, and you may prolong your days. It's a mysterious and ultimately unanswerable mitzvah. First of all, why does the mother bird need to be sent away? We speak of compassion for the animals and for the natural world. And there I'm going back to my little butterflies and the bees. Please plant wildflowers and seeds so your bees and butterflies can be happy. The things you think are weeds are their absolute vital life source. So we are talking about compassion to the animals, and by doing so, extending compassion to one another, because we are all animals, as Charles reminds us so often. He is right. This parsha is about not yoking two animals of different strengths together. It is about making the right and proper decisions, even if we don't always know why we're making the right decisions, because the tradition says if we can do right by the creatures, then perhaps the Creator can see fit to continue to do right by us. We need to earn the compassion of the Creator, even though so often our actions are really undeserving. And yet, if we are here, the Musar tradition teaches us that we are being given compassion just by the gift of being able to keep breathing. And while we are breathing, we have the chance to make better decisions. That is what this season is all about. It is about looking at our decisions of the last year, being so grateful we were able to make any decisions, and thinking again of how our behaviors, our words, our deeds, our gifts to the community lead, we hope, because in the end that's all we have, is our hope that one day our actions will lead to the right and best consequences for our world. There is a very wise ecologist and data scientist named Alessandro Filazzola. And when he was asked about how we can do anything in our lives without fear of causing harm, because we don't know what our actions will lead to, he looks to the butterflies as an example. He says, better understanding of indirect effects is one of the most important steps in trying to mitigate these effects. But even more simply, just keeping nature as close to its original state is really the most important thing. Ecosystems, families, human beings are vastly complex. The adjustment of one piece in one way or another may not have a noticeable effect, but it could have cascading effects on the entire system. In this season of the year, let's return to the butterflies. Yes, their beating wings may set off a storm, but if they do, let they be storms for change, for goodness, for the winds to blow in other directions to take us to a new and higher plane, and maybe even one day, the caring for birds in a nest could advent the coming of the Messiah. Let's be good and decent people, creating positive influences. No, not knowing where our actions would lead, but taking a leap into the realm of faith, that good and sweet words today, kind and gentle actions, may one day lead us to an era of peace. Shabbat Shalom.